Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from April 5th, 2024, and I'm recording this on October 4th, 2024. So as always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually most relevant. And as always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. We look at those two lists each week to see what books were hot, what books were moving in the market, what were people chasing in the moment, and how are they doing in the market now 6 months later. Should you have been patient? Should you have bought in? And just try to learn, do a better job when we chase those books in the moment of knowing which books we should chase and which books we should be patient on. So we got 18 books to talk about this week. I'm going to dig into the list here very quickly, but as I did a couple weeks ago, forgot to do last week, I'm going to do it again. I got a couple announcements here. First, in the description down below, there's a link for a GoFundMe for my friend Jen. Comics Will Break Your Heart. We're still trying to raise money for her as she battles cancer. In addition, if you're watching this on the day it's released, you should know Comics Curing Cancer is going on. The event is going on over on Rob, Fat Stacks, Legion of Comics, DJ Links. If you go to Comics Curing Cancer on Instagram, you can also donate to that. Their big weekend is this weekend where they're raising money. So Jen, Comics Will Break Your Heart. Her link for her GoFundMe is in the description below, and go to Instagram for Comics Curing Cancer this weekend. All right, with that, let's dig into the books and see what we can learn. First up, we got a repeat from last week. We got Batman 89, number 1. As we talked about last week, this was because Michael Keaton was at the Oscars, and Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger brought up Batman, and they kind of had a little back and forth that was kind of fun. So people were chasing this purely for nostalgia. Back then, 10 to 20, 9.8 going for 100. Now it's an 8 to 18, 9.8 going for 70. So, and I'll be back, but not way down or anything, particularly on the raw side, which is most of the sales. So we'll call it a steady, and I'll be back. No reason to chase this book in a moment, other than, it has a little bit of value, really, just because of the nostalgia anyway. So not a whole lot going on with this particular book. Next, we have Transformers number 1. This was hitting the list because Daniel Warren Johnson was doing a signing at CGC, so people were grabbing this and sending this. This is one of his, very popular book from the last couple of years in terms of like just him, but also just in terms of the comic market anyway. So this book was one of the books that was being sent a lot. Raw copies back then were going for $12, 9.8, 50 to 80, a 9.9 went all the way for $3.24 on this brand new book from 2023. Now 20 to 25 for raw copies. So raw copies are actually up. 9.8, 70 to 75. So they're about the same. 9.9, 200. That's actually way down. So overall, we're just going to call this kind of a steady. I'll be back. Not a huge reason to chase this book in a moment. You might have to pay a little more for a nice raw copy now than you did back then, but the graded copies you can actually get for a little less. So there you go. All right, next we're going to move into option news. We got a couple option books this week. First of those is Evangeline, number 1. This 90s comic was hitting the list because it was optioned by Margot Robbie's production company, and supposedly Olivia Wilde was being tapped to direct this movie that they were going to make out of this comic. I have a hard time seeing this really being a hit, but okay. Raw copies back then were still, though, only going for like $4. Now it's still like a $2 to $8 book, with most of the copies right around $4. 9.8, 60 to 75. So we'll just call this a steady, and I'll be back. No reason to chase it in the moment. You can still get it for basically the same values. If you want to say worth it, okay, but it's not really worth much. So next we have Heist, number 1 from 2019. This Vault Comics release was getting optioned also for a movie. Back then, raw copies were going for $20. Now there have been no recent sales. Listings start at $20, but no sales on any of these in the last 3 months that I could find on eBay. So that's definitely a trap. People are still wanting around the $20 mark, and the book is not moving at all. All right, with that, we got a couple of covers. And these are classic covers, not new release covers we're talking about this week. And first up, we have DNA Agents, number 24, a classic Dave Stevens cover. This is the week 2 of this big run on Dave Stevens books we had back in the spring following that little documentary that came out. People were going after all of this Dave Stevens stuff, pushing all of it to like all-time highs. So how's it done since? Well, this one back then was 75 to 90 for a raw copy, but 9.8 hit an all-time high of 819 for a 9.8. Now raw copies are 30 to 130, but only one. There's the 130 sale, which is just appears to be a correct sale, but no other copy, because it does appear to be a really nice copy, but no other sales over 100. Raw, but 9.8s are down 4 to 500, and that's multiple sales. So we're going to call this a trap on the 9.8 side. Most of the raw sales are really under that $75 mark from before, with just a couple of copies selling up over 75 all the way up to that 130. So yeah, we're going to call this down in a trap. No reason to have chased this book back then. You can definitely do better. We talked about it then that the 9.8 was double previous prices, and now it's back to those previous prices. Next, we have Planet Comics, number 1. This was on the list for the second week in a row. Last week when we talked about it, it was like a $400 to $500 for a high grade raw copy. 9.8 was $23. By this second week of the Dave Stevens mania, raw copy sold for $1,200. 9.8 sold for $2,880, a new all-time high. The 2,300 previously had been an all-time high. So this book was going for, people were paying crazy amounts for this Planet Comics number 1, and now it's a $150 to $400 raw book. 9.8, 14 to 1,800. So yeah, that's a dumpster fire. If you pay $1,200 for a raw copy, and you can now get that raw copy even on the high end for $400, that wasn't a good buy-in at the moment. All right, with that, we got a couple of Comic Buzz books. First up, we have Geiger, the 80-page giant from 2022, the first appearance of Redcoat. And this was basically that Redcoat was getting his own series, was coming in terms of like comic series. And back then, raw copies were going for $8. Now, a raw copy will cost you $10 to $30. So this is actually up straight cash, with the average being around $15-20. So this book is actually going for a little bit more than it was back then. Next, we have Geiger, the 80-page giant from 2022, the Brian Hitch Redcoat variant. So this is his first appearance. Angie's on the cover, so obviously this one was going for even more, $35 to $50 back then. Now it's a $20 to $60 book for raw copies, so all through the same range, plus a little wider on both ends. But a 9.8 only cost you $80. So yeah, we're going to call it steady and worth it on those raw sales. But the 9.8 sales don't seem to justify those high-end raw sales. But anyway, to this point, steady and worth it. Our last Comic Buzz book is Supervillain Team Up number 5, the first appearance of Shroud. And supposedly Shroud was going to be the new Moon Knight. I don't know where the storyline actually went, but that was what was causing this to hit the list, making this a $15 to $30 book. 9.4 going for $250. Now it's a $3 to $10 book with a most recent 9.2, which is the highest recent slab sale, going for only $57. Yeah, this is a dumpster fire. Nobody was interested in the Shroud as Moon Knight or going back to this book at this point. All right, next we got a bunch of X-Men 97 books, but there's won't end the list today, so not as many as we had last week. I think we had 8. This week we only have 5 X-Men 97 related books, but let's dig in. Okay, so I messed up and forgot to talk about this one. This is Uncanny X-Men Annual number 17, first appearance of Executioner on the list for the second week in a row. Back then, raw copies were $15 to $20. Now they're $1 to $15, with most sales under $10. So yeah, this is down in a trap. And now we'll move back to the books that I actually recorded. And first, we have X-Men number 11 from 1992. It's just a classic 90s Jim Lee cover with several of the characters that were in the show. So people were kind of some renewed interest in this particular book and cover. Raw copies were going for 20, and 9.8s were going for 90, and it was mostly just a big bump in sales that caused us to hit the list. Now it's a $5 to $20 book raw. 9.8, 90 to 135, so 9.8s are actually up a little bit. Raw copies are down a little bit. Overall, we'll just call this kind of steady. Yeah, this book is, classic Jim Lee, classic X-Men, but nothing super key about this other than the cover. Next, we have X-Men number 24 from that same run. This is the Rogue and Gambit kissing cover. And if you know what happened during the season, you know why there was some nostalgia and love for anything Rogue and Gambit. around this time. Raw copies back then were going for $25. Now it's a $5 to $20 book, so it's basically went back to what it was, 9.8, 150 to 180. So we're going to call this down a trap because it's basically raw copies, 10, $15 compared to 25 back then. But overall, it just kind of returned to what this book normally is. I think 9.8s are actually still up just a touch from what it was before, but the raw copies have definitely come back down, and that is most of the sales. All right, next we have Avengers Annual number 10, first appearance of Rogue. Back then, raw copies were 30 to 175, 9.8, 750 to 850. Now it's a 10 to 150 book on the raw side, at least on recent sales. 9.8, 720 to 890. So overall, again, we're just going to call this steady and worth it. Rogue, first appearance of Rogue's a great book. Probably slightly undervalued just because the cover doesn't really have her on it because the cover kind of sucks, let's be real, but I would guess this book would be worth a little bit more if it was a better cover, but that might let me get it at some point. So next we have Uncanny X-Men 239. The first Madeline Pryor is Goblin Queen, first Mr. Sinister on the cover, and obviously this was a big part of the early part of the X-Men 97 season. Raw copies 15 to 50, 9.8, 195 to 250. Now it's a $10 to $35 book for a raw copy, 9.8, 160, only one sale there. So we'll call this down and I'll be back. Borderline getting into trap territory, but definitely a book taking a step back since the show has moved on, and appears we've, at least for now, even when the show comes back, moved on from Madeline and Mr. Sinister. All right, the last, four books, are all MCU books. And this had to do with news around the Fantastic Four movie. Basically, first up we got Fantastic Four number 50. This is the third appearance of the Silver Surfer, and obviously there was a lot of rumors we were getting some version of Silver Surfer in the Fantastic Four movie. Back then, a 5.0 was hitting 238, and 8.0 was hitting 1,050. Now those 5.0s are 250 and 380 on the most two recent sales, and 8.0 1290. Raw copies are 75 to 400. So this is actually up, and it was up across multiple grades. This has always been kind of the stepsister of the three Galactus Surfer books. You know, everybody's one at 48 or 49. 50's always been lagging behind, but it is up and stayed up based on that news, which is intriguing because the next book we're going to talk about didn't go up and stay up, and that is Fantastic Four number 49. First Galactus, second Surfer, much bigger key for most people. And a 6.0 of this book was $1,000 back then. Now it's a $650 to $700 book. There's been a step back across multiple grades here that I looked at. Raw copies 150 to 850. So yeah, this is kind of over this 6 month period. When I say this, down in a trap over the 6 month period. Now, obviously, this is a great book long term. Long term, it's straight cash. If you bought in at the higher prices, eventually you'll get those back. And just interesting that during this 6 month period, 50 continued to kind of slightly gain, whereas 49 took a pretty good sized step backwards in terms of value. All right, next we have Silver Surfer number 1. First Silver Surfer solo appearance or solo title. Say all that 5 times fast. And the first appearance of Shalabal, who is apparently going to be in the movie and probably going to be at least a surfer in the movie, if not the surfer in the movie. Back then, raw copies were going for 3 to 750. 6.0 was 750. 9.0, 3,800. Now, 2 to 800 for raw. 5 to 700 for 6.0. 32 to 42 on a 9.0. So this one we're going to call steady, and then I'll be back. Definitely a few deals in there, but mostly pretty close to what it was before. So just interesting, 3 books, 3 Silver Age books, all related to Silver Surfer. One kind of continued to go up a little bit. One took a step back, which is considered the biggest book of the 3. And then the other one took a slight step, kind of just stayed where it was at. So interesting that we got 3 different trends on these 3 books. I think it had to do a little bit with just the underlying overall value. All right, next, our last book is Earth X, number 12, the first time Shawla Ball appears as a Silver Surfer. $40 to $100 back then. People were paying $40 to over $100 for this book, for just a raw copy. Now it's a $15 to $40 book. 9.8 still going for $250, which seems super high when you think of all the 9.8s of characters you can get for under $250. But yeah, so this is down in a dumpster fire. And I say that because like there was lots of sales, $80, $90, $100 back then. And most of these sales there were a few $30 to $40 sales, but most of them were like 20s. Yeah, this is definitely a dumpster fire. And we'll see what this movie becomes, how good it actually is. We should get it by this time next year. We should have it, I believe. So that is this week's list. I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to remind you about the Comics Curing Cancer event going on this weekend. Check it out on Instagram, and you can find the links to all the different channels that are contributing to that event. And then also remind you about my friend Jen. Comics Will Break Your Heart. We got a GoFundMe going for her as she also continues to battle cancer. So with that, I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time. Later.